Some Eastern Cape residents have raised concern over the lack of service delivery in the area. The DA says it's on a mission to rescue the province from corrupt officials, infrastructure collapse and violent crime. The party's leader, John Steenhuisen, is at the infamous Lesiton sports facility while on a two-day oversight visit to the province. Local contractors say the 15 million rand price tag for a substandard sport facility is inflated. eNCA's Ronald Masinda is following that story for us, and he joins us now live to tell us more. Ronald, how was the oversight and what did people say?
Good afternoon, Maseko. Well, the oversight visit took us to Lesiton. It is an area about 14 kilometers outside of Komani and made more infamous for its stadium that cost in the region of 15 million rand. But the Democratic Alliance here in the province say that it cost much more. And this particular stadium, there has been no activity and there have been question marks as to how the eNCA local municipality managed to spend so much money for a stadium that is simply not up to scratch. But those were some of the issues that were raised by community members where we went to earlier. They said that that money would have been better allocated in dealing with a lot of the service delivery challenges. I mean, one gentleman we spoke to earlier said they've been without clean running water for the past 8 years, and a lot of people who live in those villages don't have any electricity. So during the engagement with John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, they say that time has to change, that the DA will be now the party that a lot of them will be voting for come the next year's general election. And of course the DA is also using this opportunity to try and drum up support ahead of next year's election. And after today's visit, they moved to Gqeberha on Friday, where they'll be engaging with community members from the northern areas who have been plagued by gang violence. So we also heard from a member of Parliament in the provincial legislature, and this is what she had to say about today's visit.
The situation is extremely dire here. We will notice that in the Stats SA report, it shows that about 19.5% of the Eastern Cape, there are rural communities that still do not have access to piped water. However, that stat does not include areas that have access to piped water where it's not functional. And Lesiton is a very good example of that, where people still need to get water in wheelbarrows from the river. And that is why the Democratic Alliance has chosen this particular community to pilot a project where we are making use of a hydro ram pump that is placed in a river, uses no electricity, no external power source, only kinetic power of the river to bring access to these communities that is even as far as 200 meters away and 200 meters up. That is what that pump can deliver. Initially, we implemented a motion in the legislature and said, guys, let's just run a pilot to bring access to water to these rural communities. Let's just try it out. Let's see how it works. And they voted against it. They were vehemently opposed to the idea, and that is why the DA in the Eastern Cape decided to run this project ourselves here in Lesiton. And I just want to add that standing here next to this 15 million rand stadium that was not needed by this community just illustrates exactly how out of touch the ANC government is with the needs of the people and the priorities of the people.
Now, the DA's John Steenhuisen, Ronald, has been adamant that coalitions work despite troubles faced in Nelson Mandela Bay.
Yes, indeed, Maseko, and he seems to also be supporting the idea of a provincial commission of inquiry to look into issues such as corruption in Nelson Mandela Bay. It is an area where there's been a lot of political instability. Now, just very recently, we heard from the Northern or National Alliance, as they now call themselves, a party that Gary van Niekerk, the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, was the leader or is the leader, whichever way you look at it, because there are conflicting views as to who's in leadership. That party expelled Gary van Niekerk recently, and with that expulsion, it meant that Gary van Niekerk and another member of Nelson Mandela Bay Council who belongs to the party, that meant that 2 seats at the Nelson Mandela Bay Council were vacant, and Gary van Niekerk then went to seek an urgent interdict to stop the IEC from making those positions vacant, which would have meant that Nelson Mandela Bay ultimately would be without a mayor. So since that interdict, Gary van Niekerk is back in office, and since then the city manager, who's also facing corruption charges, she has now been placed on precautionary suspension. And it's all these problems, as well as allegations of Gary van Niekerk himself being involved in corruption, that has led the Democratic Alliance to call for Premier Oscar Mabuyane to look into these problems, to help resolve these issues at Nelson Mandela Bay. And just to paint a picture of how bad the situation is there, since the 2021 local government elections, we've had 3 parties who have been in power in the coalition government. Since then, we've had the likes of Eugene Johnson from the ANC as mayor, as well as Ratief Oorendal from the Democratic Alliance, and now Gary van Niekerk from the National Alliance. This is what John Steenhuisen had to say about the problems faced in Nelson Mandela Bay.
We'll continue to use the provincial legislature and parliament as platforms to drive this particular issue. Nelson Mandela Bay is in a terrible situation. There is literally very little service delivery happening because of the internal infighting taking place in that council. One of the things we've suggested is perhaps looking at doing a fresh election there, because the fragmentation of the vote in Nelson Mandela Bay is very similar to the fragmentation in a place like Joburg. And it has not led to a situation where stable coalitions can be formed. So we need to do something to restabilize government there, and then to be able to allow a coalition to be formed that is able to bring the stability there. You're not going to root out the corruption and maladministration while there's a state of chaos in the municipality. In fact, many of the officials benefit when there's a state of chaos, because the chaos provides a distraction for the stealing and the maladministration that goes on.
All right, Ronald Masinda live for us there. Thank you. Let's leave it there for now.